All right, welcome back, everybody. In this lesson, we're going to go ahead and continue talking about particles. And what I want to talk about in this lesson is collisions and collision behaviors. Okay, so we can have particles collide with geometry as well. So I went ahead and set up just a sphere with a basic particle emitter here off our sphere. So if we go ahead and play, we get our normal behavior. What I want to do is maybe I want to have a ground that I want to go ahead and collide with. Okay, so these particles will collide on the ground. So an easy way to do that is if I come up to collisions, I have a ground plane. Okay, so if I go ahead and click that, you can see it lays down this kind of proxy ground plane geometry. And you see these arrows kind of going off on all sides, meaning that this ground plane is infinite. So it's going to keep going in all directions. It's not just this area we're seeing here. If particles bounced over here, they'll still bounce off the ground here. Okay. So if we go ahead and press play, I'll go ahead and press play, you can see that we get these particles kind of bouncing off the ground. All right. We have a couple nodes that it laid down. One is this ground plane node. If I dive in, all this does is bring in that proxy geometry so we can visualize the ground plane. But really, if we dive into our AutoDOP, I'll press L, and you can see that we get this ground plane node with this merge and the static solver merging into our POP network. Okay, so the static solver is kind of like our POP solver. It's the engine that's driving our ground plane here. And if we go to our ground plane, we have some parameters here that deal with the proxy geometry if we want a different color or display it or a different size. But really, we want to deal with the physical attributes here. So we have bounce and friction are your two main ones here. Okay, so obviously the more bounce I give it, the more these particles will go ahead and bounce on these collisions. So if I give it no bounce, these will just kind of stick and slide across the surface. So we'll give this a little bounce. And then same thing with friction. If I don't give this any friction, these things will go ahead and kind of slide quicker on the surface. Okay, so those are the two main attributes, or two main parameters that you'll deal with over on this end. We can also make objects colliders as well. Okay, so same kind of thing. If I come up, I'm going to go ahead and lay down a box, and let's go ahead and dive in. Let's go ahead and go so I can see where I'm at. I'm going to make this kind of a little bigger in X and Y, or sorry, X and Z, like this. And let's just bring it up a little bit. And I'll bring it down a little in Y. So maybe something like that. So we want to use this as a collider for our particles as well. So what I can do is, coming up to my collision tabs again, I can either pick static or deforming object. Depending if it's animated, I'll pick deforming. If it's a static object like this one, I'll go ahead and pick static. So with our box selected, I'll go ahead and hit static. And we won't see anything here, but if I dive into my AutoDOP and press L, you can see we have this box object, this static object node that's merged in, going through our static solver as well. Okay, and we have some properties here. Collisions, we'll talk about when we get to our rigid bodies, but physical, same kind of thing, bounce, friction, if it's deforming or not, and our different paths here. Okay, so if I go ahead and press play, now you can see it collides with our box and our ground plane here as well. And again, we can just control our friction and our bounce if we want to right here. Okay. So that's how we could do that. But there's other types of collisions we can do as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just bypass our box so we don't have our box in here. If I hide other objects. And I'm going to go ahead and hit tab, we'll lay it on pop, and there's one node I want to look at which is called pop collision detect. So if I bring this in here and I just bring that in line, so I can pick a collision object again to collide with our particles. So if I come in here, I want to pick our box object. It'll bring this in. You can see it's using our guide here. And we can tell if it's animated or not with this deforming geometry. And right away, if we play this, you can see that once our particles collide with our object, our particles turn red. And that has to do with our behavior here. Okay, so once it collides, it's going ahead and adding these to our hit. Okay, our hit. There's a bunch of attributes here that are useful if we want to maybe trigger another action based on our collisions, or if we want to make a new particle system based on our collisions here. So we can do a lot with this this collision detection. So we can change, the color when it gets into our hit group. We can go ahead and create that group here. So we can, make something called hit group. That'll go ahead and put all these particles that hit our collider inside this hit group. Okay, move to hit, we'll go ahead and put it inside of a attribute called hit. And then we have different responses here. Okay, so right now it's none, it just goes through. But if we want to go ahead and maybe kill off our particles, and you can see right when they collide, our particles die off. We have stick, so our particles will go ahead and just stick to the surface here. And we have slide here as well. So they'll just go ahead and kind of slide and then fall off, just like so. So we don't have any bounce here. If we wanted any kind of bounce or really real physical collision, we would use that static object up here or deforming object. But this pop collision detect is more if we want to go ahead and trigger some actions based off of a collision here. Okay, usually set to die or none. If we wanted to stick or slide, we can do that as well. That's useful if we want to create some type of rain system or something. But so this pop collision detect is really helpful to determine our collisions. All right, so that's it for this video. In the next one, we're going to talk about a couple other pop nodes that are pretty useful. We'll see you then.